The amphitheater was built for silence. Every surface inside it was designed to swallow sound, so that the only thing a cadet could hear during the test was the beating of their own heart and the soft hum of their console. 200 seats curved downward in a half-circle toward the proctor's platform, and every one of them was filled. Species from across the galaxy sat shoulder to shoulder, tentacle to wing, crystal to fur. They had traveled years to reach this place. Some had trained their entire lives. Instructor Velthon stood at the center of the platform and looked up at them with his 4 pale eyes. He was Korvathi, tall, thin, with bones made of something that looked like glass and rang like bells when he moved. He was over 3,000 years old, and in all that time, he had never once smiled during an opening address. "Welcome to the Gauntlet," he said. His voice filled the room without effort. "You are the best your worlds have sent, the sharpest minds, the proudest achievements of your species." He paused. "It will not matter." No one laughed. No one ever did. "The Gauntlet is not a test of knowledge," Velthon continued. "It is a test of thought itself. Your console will present you with questions. Each question is harder than the one before it. The questions do not repeat. They do not follow a single subject. They pull from logic, ethics, mathematics, space, time, language, and things that have no name in any tongue. The test does not end. It simply outlasts you." He let those words settle. "In 4,000 years of this institution, no one gets past question 3. He held up 3 long fingers, and his crystal bones hummed softly. 17 beings in all of recorded history have reached question 5. Their names are carved into the walls of this very room. You will not join them. That is not an insult. It is a fact, like gravity. Accept it, and you may still learn something about the shape of your own mind." In the back row, a young man sat with his legs stretched out and his arms crossed. His name was Jace Morrow, and he was human. He was 24 years old, brown-haired, average height, with the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. He had come to the Galactic Union Academy on a 3rd-tier scholarship, the kind they gave to newly contacted species as a polite gesture. Nobody expected anything from him. His species had only been part of the Union for 11 years. His file listed Earth as a Tier 9 civilization and described humans as moderate intelligence, notable for endurance and aggression. Jace was not listening to Velthan's speech. He had heard the important part already. The test was on the console, and the console was in front of him. So while the instructor was still talking about history and tradition, and the weight of 4,000 years, Jace reached forward and tapped the screen. The first question appeared. It was a logic problem, a simple one involving 3 variables and a hidden constraint. Jace read it, tilted his head, and answered. The screen changed. The second question was harder. It involved a moral dilemma between 2 species with completely different definitions of harm. Jace thought about it for 4 seconds and typed his answer. The screen changed again. Question 3 appeared. This was the wall. This was where every species in the galaxy hit the ceiling of their cognition and stared at a problem that seemed to have no solution. It blended spatial reasoning with ethical paradox and wrapped both in a layer of mathematics that required thinking in 11 dimensions. Jace squinted at it. Then, something shifted behind his eyes. Not intelligence exactly, but something stranger. A willingness to look at the problem from an angle it was not designed to be seen from. He didn't solve it the way the test expected. He reframed it. He treated the ethical paradox as a geometry problem, and the geometry problem as a story. And somewhere in the middle, the answer fell out like a loose tooth. He typed it in. The screen changed. Down on the proctor's platform, Velthon was still speaking. He was explaining the history of the Gauntlet's creation, how the Archon Council had designed it as the ultimate measure of cognitive ability. He did not notice the small alert on his proctor display. Not at first. But then, the number changed again, and again. Velthon stopped mid-sentence. He looked down at his display. One console in the amphitheater was advancing. It was not on question 3. It was not on question 5. The number read, question 12. His bones began to hum, not the soft sound of speech, but the high, tight sound his species made when they were afraid. He looked up at the back row. The human was typing. Question 15, question 18, question 23. The other cadets had not noticed yet. Most of them were still waiting for the speech to end. But a Delvari cadet named Syra Nulvex, 4 arms, silver skin, a mind like a diamond, had turned her head. She could hear the rapid tap of fingers on a console. She could see the human screen changing and changing and changing. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Velthon gripped the edge of his podium. The crystal of his fingers cracked against the metal. He had been a proctor for 2,000 years. He had watched geniuses weep at question 3. He had watched entire delegations of the galaxy's finest minds break themselves against the gauntlet's walls. And now a creature from a death world, a species they had only discovered a decade ago, was passing questions that should not have been passable. Question 31. Question 36. Question 40. The amphitheater had gone quiet. Every cadet was watching now. Some of them could see Jace's screen from where they sat. Others could read the growing horror on Velthan's face, and understood that something impossible was happening. Jace did not look up. He was not showing off. He was not even aware that anything unusual was occurring. To him, the questions were just interesting. Each one was a new shape, a new pattern, and he liked patterns. He had always liked patterns. On Earth, he had been considered bright but unremarkable, a kid who was good at puzzles and bad at sitting still. Here, in a room full of the galaxy's greatest minds, he was doing the same thing he had always done. He was just looking at things until they stopped being confusing. Question 47. Velthon's speech was over. He had stopped talking at some point and hadn't even realized it. The silence in the amphitheater was total. 200 cadets and 1 ancient instructor stared at the human in the back row, and the human stared at his screen. In the far corner of the amphitheater, hidden in a shadow so deep it seemed intentional, something stirred. A figure sat in a seat that had not been visible a moment before. Or perhaps it had always been there, and no one had thought to look. This was Observer Kale, a representative of the Archon Council, the beings who had built the Gauntlet, built the Academy, and perhaps built the Union itself. Kale had sat in this amphitheater for 400 years, without moving, without speaking, without opening his eyes. He opened his eyes now. They were the color of old starlight, and they were fixed on Jace Morrow, with an expression that might have been wonder, or might have been terror, or might have been something so old it no longer had a name. The console in front of Jace changed again. Question 48. He kept typing. They moved him to a private room. Jace thought he was in trouble. The room was small and white and had no windows. Just a single console on a metal desk, and a chair that adjusted itself to his body the moment he sat down. 2 armed guards stood outside the door. Not to keep him in, he was told, but to keep everyone else out. Velthan stood across from him, his crystal bones still humming with that low, tight frequency that meant fear. The instructor had not spoken since the amphitheater. He studied Jace the way a scientist might study a crack in the foundation of a building, not with curiosity, but with the urgent need to understand how much damage it would cause. "You are not in trouble," Velthon said at last. "Then why are there guards?" Jace asked. "Because in approximately 40 minutes, every intelligence agency in the Galactic Union will want access to you, and I would prefer they wait until I understand what I am looking at." Jace blinked. "I just answered some questions." You answered 47 questions in the time it took me to deliver a 10-minute speech. The highest score in 4,000 years was question 5. You passed it without slowing down. Velthon's 4 eyes narrowed. The console in front of you is still active. I would like you to continue. So Jace continued. He passed question 50 while Velthon watched. Then 60. Then 80. The questions were getting stranger now. They weren't problems anymore, so much as landscapes. Vast tangles of logic and feeling and mathematics woven together into shapes that shouldn't have been possible. A question about the ethics of time travel that required modeling 16 simultaneous cultural perspectives. A spatial puzzle set in a geometry that had no fixed number of dimensions. A language problem in a tongue that had never existed, where Jace had to deduce the grammar, the meaning, and the intent of the speaker from a single phrase. He solved them all. Not quickly. Some took him several minutes. But he solved them. And his answers were not just correct, they were elegant. He didn't force his way through the problems. He found paths the problems didn't know they had. Velthon left the room at question 93 and walked to the analysis wing, where a dozen senior proctors had gathered around a wall of screens showing Jace's answer logs in real time. "He is cheating," said Proctor Den, a squat, gray-skinned Maluri with 6 eyes and no patience. "Neural implant, AI symbiont, something." "We scanned him," said another proctor. "Full biological sweep. He has no implants, no modifications, no symbiotic organisms, no external data connections. He is baseline human, completely unmodified." "That is not possible." And yet, the room went quiet. On the screen, Jace's score ticked to question 98. In a different part of the station, Cadet Syra Nulvex sat in her quarters and stared at a datapad. She had requested access to Jace's anonymized answer logs, a privilege granted to any cadet who wished to study the Gauntlet's results. She had expected to find brute force answers, the kind of raw computational power that some silicon-based species could bring to bear on logic problems. What she found instead made her put the datapad down and sit very still for a long time. His answers were not computational. They were creative. He treated mathematics like poetry and ethics like architecture. He found connections between fields that had no business being connected, linking a problem about resource distribution to a principle of fluid dynamics, solving an alien moral dilemma by comparing it to something called the prisoner's dilemma from Earth's game theory. His mind didn't move in straight lines. It spiraled, leaped, doubled back, and arrived at answers from directions the test had never anticipated. Syra was Delvari. Her species had perfect memory, silicon neural lattices, and the ability to process information at speeds that made most organic brains look like mud. She had been the presumed top candidate of her cohort. She had stalled at question 3 like everyone else. Reading Jace's answers, she felt something her species had no word for. The closest translation was the vertigo of being small. Back in the private room, Jace reached question 100 and kept going. Velthon convened an emergency meeting with the senior faculty. The debate was fierce. Half of them wanted to invalidate the test. There had to be an error, a glitch, a flaw in the Gauntlet's adaptive algorithms. The other half wanted to study the human like a specimen under glass. None of them were comfortable. It was an old Korvathi scholar named Tethra who silenced the room. She had spent her career studying the evolution of intelligence across species, and she had read Earth's biological file more carefully than anyone else in the Union. "You are all looking at this wrong," she said. "You keep asking how one human can do this. The answer is in their planet." She pulled up Earth's environmental data. The room watched as she laid it out. The ice ages, the volcanic winters, the predators, the diseases, the constant war between tribes and nations, the earthquakes and floods and droughts, the parasites and poisons, and the 1,000 different ways that planet tried to kill everything on it every single day for 4 billion years. Most intelligent species evolve in stable environments, Tethra said. They develop specialized cognition, one type of thinking, refined to perfection. The Delvari have memory. The Korvathi have temporal modeling. The Maluri have spatial awareness. Each species found its niche and optimized. She pointed at the spinning image of Earth. Humans did not have that luxury. Their world never stayed the same long enough for specialization. Every generation faced a new threat, a new environment, a new problem that had never existed before. So, instead of becoming specialists, they became something else. She paused. They became generalists. Their brains developed recursive, cross-domain pattern recognition, the ability to take any problem from any field and attack it from every angle at once. They don't think faster than us. They think sideways. They find connections we cannot see because we were never forced to look for them. The room was silent. We built the gauntlet to test the limits of specialized intelligence, Tethra said quietly. We never considered what would happen when a generalized intelligence walked through the door. On the screens behind her, Jace's score ticked past 200. He kept going. The questions at this level were not questions anymore. They were experiences, vast conceptual spaces that the solver had to navigate by feel as much as by thought. Jace moved through them the way a river moves through rock. Not by being harder than the stone, but by finding every crack, every gap, every hidden path. At question 312, he stopped. Velthan rushed to the monitoring station, his bones ringing with alarm. Had the human finally hit his limit? Had the gauntlet broken him at last? The comm channel from Jace's room crackled to life. "Hey," Jace said. "Is there a cafeteria or something? I skipped breakfast and I'm really hungry." Velthan stared at the comm speaker for a very long time. In the deepest part of the station, in a chamber that did not appear on any map, Observer Kale sat alone before an ancient communication device that had not been activated in 1200 years. He placed his hand on it, and it glowed with a light older than most civilizations. 2 words, in a language that predated the Union itself. 9th class. The device went dark. Somewhere across the galaxy, something ancient received the message and began to stir. The words spread faster than light. Within 6 hours of Jace Morrow's test, every major government in the Galactic Union had received a classified briefing. Within 12 hours, the briefing had leaked. Within a day, the name 9th class was on the lips of diplomats, generals, scientists, and street vendors from one end of the galaxy to the other. Most of them had never heard the term before. That was by design. The Archon Council, the ancient silent beings who had founded the Union 4,000 years ago, had buried the concept so deep in their archives that finding it required clearances that most species didn't know existed. But now Observer Kale had spoken, and the archives had responded, and scholars across the galaxy were pulling up records they didn't know they had, and reading words that made their blood run cold. The classification system for cognitive emergence had 8 tiers. Every known species fell somewhere between Tier 1 and Tier 8. The Delvari were Tier 7. The Korvathi were Tier 7. The Archons themselves were believed to be Tier 8, though no one had ever confirmed it. The tiers were not a ranking of intelligence in the simple sense. They measured the depth and flexibility of a species' ability to model reality. Tier 8 was considered the theoretical maximum. No biological or synthetic mind could go higher. Tier 9 was different. It was not a step above Tier 8. It was a break in the pattern, a new kind of thinking altogether. The old records described it in language that sounded more like prophecy than science. A mind that did not just solve problems, but generated new ways of solving problems. A mind that could look at any system of thought, mathematics, ethics, language, physics, and see through it to the structure underneath, then rebuild that structure into something better. self-compounding intelligence, recursive creativity, a cognitive engine that got stronger the more it was used. No species had ever reached 9th class. The records said it was impossible. The records also said that if it ever happened, everything would change. And now the Galactic Union was afraid. The fear split the Union into two camps almost overnight. On one side were the species who saw opportunity, the welcoming bloc, they called themselves. If humanity was truly 9th class, then they were the greatest resource the galaxy had ever produced. Elevate them, educate them, give them access to Union science, and watch what they could do with it. On the other side were the species who saw a threat. They called themselves the Preservation Alliance, but everyone else called them the Containment Bloc. Their argument was simple and cold. There were 8 billion humans on Earth. If one baseline human with no training could reach question 312 on the gauntlet, what would happen when those 8 billion minds were given access to galactic technology, galactic mathematics, galactic science? What would happen when they started improving on it? The Containment Bloc wanted Earth quarantined. They wanted human access to Union knowledge restricted. Some of them, in private rooms behind closed doors, talked about things much worse than quarantine. Jace knew none of this. He was eating lunch in the Academy cafeteria when Siren Nulvex sat down across from him with a tray she did not touch. "How do you do it?" she asked. Jace looked up from something called a nutrient stack that tasted like cardboard and sadness. "Do what?" "The gauntlet. The questions. How do you solve them?" He thought about it. He chewed. He swallowed. "I just look at them." "You just look at them." "Yeah, I look at the problem, and at first it's all tangled up and confusing. But if I keep looking, I start to see patterns. Like, you know when you stare at one of those pictures that's just dots, and then suddenly you can see a 3D image hidden inside? It's like that. I look at the problem until the answer kind of pops out." Syra stared at him. Her species had 4 arms and could process information at 10 times the speed of a human brain. She had trained at the finest institutions on her homeworld. She had memorized the complete mathematical frameworks of 11 civilizations. And this man, this soft, slow, fragile man from a planet of violence and weather, was describing the deepest cognitive ability in the known galaxy as if it were a party trick. "Everything is a pattern," Jace said. "Even the things that look random. Especially those." 2 levels below the cafeteria, Instructor Velthan stood in a corridor outside a door he had never opened. He had known the door was there for 2,000 years. Every senior proctor did. They were told it led to a storage area. They were told not to think about it. Velthan was done not thinking about it. He pressed his hand to the lock. It scanned him, rejected him, and then, after a pause that lasted exactly 3 heartbeats, scanned him again and opened. Behind the door was a passage, and at the end of the passage was a room, and in the room was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was a sealed archive that glowed with the same ancient light as Kale's communication device. The archive had unsealed itself, automatically, keyed to a gauntlet score that was never supposed to be reached. Velthan read the message inside. It was short. It was millions of years old. And it changed everything he thought he knew about the Union, the Academy, and the purpose of the gauntlet. The message said, "When the 9th wakes, the trial begins." That night, Velthan went to Jace's quarters. The human was sitting on his bed reading something on a datapad, a children's guide to galactic geography, the only thing in the Academy library written at a level his translator could fully handle. "I need to tell you something," Velthan said, "and I need you to listen carefully." Jace put the datapad down. "The gauntlet was not designed as an admissions test," Velthan said. His voice was quiet, and his bones were not humming. That was somehow worse. It was designed as a lock, a cognitive barrier. Its purpose was to ensure that no mind could ever reach the sealed archives of the Archon Council. The questions were engineered to exceed the maximum capability of any known form of intelligence. They were not meant to be answered. They were meant to be impossible. Jace sat very still. You did not pass a test, Jace. You broke a lock. And behind that lock was a message that has been waiting for someone like you for longer than most stars have been burning. What does it say? Velthan told him. Jace was quiet for a long time. Then he said, What's the trial? I do not know, but I believe we are about to find out. 3,000 light-years away, in a secure office aboard a diplomatic station, Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Union, a woman named Priya Okafor, received a visitor. The visitor was tall, gray-skinned, and spoke with the careful precision of someone delivering a threat wrapped in politeness. Your species is being discussed, the visitor said. At the highest levels, some see your people as the Union's greatest hope. Others see you as its greatest danger. There are fleets being repositioned as we speak. I am telling you this as a courtesy. Ambassador Okafor folded her hands on her desk. She had been a diplomat for 30 years. She had negotiated trade deals and peace treaties, and once talked a warlord out of bombing a city by sharing a cup of tea with him. She did not flinch easily. What exactly are you advising me to do? She asked. Choose your next moves carefully, the visitor said. The galaxy is watching your species now. Everything your people do from this moment forward will be judged, measured, and remembered. The visitor left. Ambassador Okafor sat alone in her office and stared at the wall for a long time. Then she picked up her communicator and called Earth. She had some things to discuss with her government, and none of them could wait. The Archon Vault was deep inside Threshold Station, in a place that did not appear on any map and could not be reached by any corridor that existed on a permanent basis. The walls moved. The floors shifted. The architecture itself seemed alive, rearranging itself around visitors like a living thing, deciding whether to swallow them or let them pass. Jace walked through it with Velthon at his side, and Observer Kale ahead of them both. Kale moved like smoke, silent and fluid, and the walls opened for him without hesitation. The Union was not what you think it is, Kale said. These were the first words he had spoken in 400 years, and his voice sounded like it came from the bottom of an ocean. It was not founded as an alliance. It was not created for trade, or peace, or the sharing of knowledge. He stopped before a door that was not a door. It was a gap in reality, a place where the wall simply chose not to exist. It was a nursery, a garden, built to grow minds, cultivate intelligence, push species toward their cognitive limits, and wait, for thousands of years if necessary, until one of them broke through. Broke through to what? Jace asked. To you, Kale said, and stepped through the gap. Inside the vault, the truth was laid bare. Holographic records older than most star systems played across the walls, showing the history of the Archons, not as the mysterious founders of the Union, but as the last survivors of a civilization that had been destroyed by something they could not fight. They called it the Quiet. It was not an army. It was not a weapon. It was an absence, a spreading nothing that moved through space like a tide of silence. Where it passed, stars did not explode or collapse. They simply stopped existing. Matter came undone. Even the concepts that held reality together, time, space, cause, effect, dissolved into a blank, featureless void. The Archons had tried everything. Weapons passed through the Quiet, like light through glass. Shields were meaningless. Communication was impossible. Any mind that tried to touch the Quiet forgot what it was trying to say. The greatest thinkers of the Archon civilization had stared into the void and come back empty. Their thoughts erased, their brilliance gone. The Quiet could not be fought with force. It could not be matched with any known form of intelligence. It could only be faced by a mind that thought in ways that had never existed before. So the Archons built the Union. They seeded the galaxy with the conditions for intelligent life. They built the Academy. They built the Gauntlet, not as a test, but as a detector, an alarm system designed to ring when the impossible happened and a ninth-class mind finally appeared. For millions of years, fading, diminishing, spending the last of their energy holding the quiet at the edges of the galaxy like a dam holding back a flood. "We are almost gone," Kale said. His form flickered as he spoke, and for a moment Jace could see through him to the wall behind. "We have been dying for longer than your species has existed. We built all of this, the Union, the Academy, the Gauntlet, because we knew we could not hold forever. We needed someone to take our place." Jace stared at the records on the walls. He was 24 years old. He had come here on a courtesy scholarship. 3 days ago, his biggest problem had been figuring out how the cafeteria menu worked. "You built a galaxy," he said slowly, "so that someone would evolve who could answer a question you couldn't." "Yes, and I'm that someone. We believe so." Jace was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No pressure." Meanwhile, the galaxy was tearing itself apart. The containment block had moved beyond politics. A coalition of 12 species had assembled a fleet, 300 warships drawn from their combined navies, and sent it toward Earth. The official justification was protective quarantine. The real purpose was control. If humanity was the key to surviving the quiet, then whoever controlled humanity controlled the future. And there were species in the Union who would rather see Earth burned than see humans walk free with the power of ninth-class cognition. On Threshold Station, the Gauntlet Amphitheater had been emptied of cadets and converted into a tribunal chamber. Jace was brought before a hastily assembled council of species representatives. The charges were not criminal, they were existential. The council wanted to decide what to do with humanity, and they wanted to do it now, while there was still time to act. The representative of the Maluri spoke first. "The human species is a danger. One mind has broken the gauntlet. What happens when billions of such minds are unleashed? We cannot allow this." Others echoed the sentiment. The Korvathi delegation called for careful management. The Thren delegation used the word containment. A dozen other species murmured their agreement in a dozen different languages, and the translator systems rendered all of it into the same cold fear. Jace was asked to speak, to justify his species' right to exist unrestricted, to make a case for humanity. He stood at the center of the amphitheater, surrounded by the staring eyes and sensors and organs of perception of 100 different species, and he did something no one expected. He asked a question. "The Archons built it, and you all accepted it. You sent your children here for 4,000 years to take a test designed to find someone who could think past the limits of known intelligence. You prayed for it, you waited for it, and now it's happened." He looked around the room. "So my question is, why are you angry?" The chamber was silent. "You built a lock and hoped someone would break it. Someone did, and your first response is to put them in a cage." He paused. "That doesn't make sense, unless you were never looking for an answer, unless you were looking for permission to stay afraid." The silence that followed was the loudest thing the amphitheater had ever contained. It was Syra who broke it. She had been granted permission to stand as Jace's advocate, and she stepped forward now with all 4 arms at her sides, and her voice clear as crystal. "I stalled at question 3, she said. "I am Delvari. My memory is perfect. My processing speed is 10 times that of most species here, and I could not pass the barrier that this human walked through without stopping. I could be angry about that. I could be afraid." She looked at the council. "But I am not, because I understand something you don't want to admit. He is not your enemy. He is the answer to a prayer you forgot you were making." Velthon stood from the Korvathi delegation's bench. His own people stared at him in shock. He was breaking ranks, siding with the human over his species. "I have been a proctor of this institution for 2,000 years, he said. "I have watched minds break against the gauntlet. I have told every cohort the same thing. No one passes question 3. I said it because it was true. It was true until 3 days ago." He looked at Jace. "I will not punish someone for proving me wrong. I will not fear a mind simply because it is greater than my own." The tribunal descended into chaos. Arguments erupted between species. Alliances shattered and reformed. And through it all, the fleet continued toward Earth. But Earth had been warned. Ambassador Okafor had made her calls, and the governments of Earth had done something that no species in the history of the Union had ever thought to do. They opened everything. Every broadcast, every signal, every piece of human culture, music, art, literature, scientific debate, comedy, argument, lullabies, love letters, sports commentary, children's laughter, political speeches, protest songs, and a million other fragments of 8 billion lives, was transmitted outward on every frequency, in every direction, to every receiver in the galaxy. The message was not a weapon. It was an introduction. "Here we are," it said, "all of us. Not a species of super soldiers or cognitive weapons. A species of people. Messy, brilliant, confused, creative, stubborn, kind, and always, always asking questions." The galaxy listened, and for a moment, the fear paused. Then the long-range sensors at the edge of Union space detected something, and the fear came back stronger than ever. Not of humanity this time, but of something much worse. The quiet had arrived, centuries ahead of schedule, and it was not stopping at the edges anymore. The first star disappeared on a Tuesday. It was a small yellow sun at the edge of Union space, orbited by 3 uninhabited planets and a belt of ice. One moment it was there, burning as it had burned for 5 billion years. The next moment, it was not. No explosion, no collapse, no flash of light or burst of radiation. The star and its planets and its belt of ice simply stopped existing, and in their place was nothing. Not darkness, not empty space, but a true and absolute nothing that the mind could not look at without flinching. The quiet had arrived. Within hours, 2 more stars vanished. Then a nebula. Then an entire system of 7 worlds, one of them inhabited. The evacuation ships made it out in time, but the refugees who looked back through their windows saw something that none of them could afterward describe. They said the words, "It was like forgetting, and it was like silence, and it was like the universe was being erased." But none of those words were right. There were no right words. The quiet was the absence of everything that made words possible. Fleets mobilized across the galaxy. The containment block's ships turned away from Earth and raced toward the spreading void. They fired everything they had: kinetic weapons, energy beams, gravity bombs, quantum disruptors. All of it passed through the quiet, like sound through vacuum. The void advanced, and the fleet retreated, and the stars kept disappearing. On Threshold Station, panic was a living thing. It moved through the corridors like a current, pulling people along, making them shout and run, and cling to each other. Species that had spent centuries in cold diplomacy held each other's hands for the first time. In the Archon vault, Kale collapsed. He fell like a tower of ash, his ancient form crumbling at the edges, his light guttering. Velthon caught him, or tried to, but his hands passed through Kale's shoulders as if the observer were made of memory rather than matter. "We held it back," Kale whispered, "for so long, but we are finished. There is nothing left of us to give." Jace knelt beside him. "What is it? The quiet, what is it really?" Kale's eyes found his. They were dimmer now, but in their depths, something still burned. "It is the question," he said. "The last question. The one at the end of every gauntlet. the one we could never reach, the one we built everything to find someone who could answer. What question? Kale's voice was barely a breath. Why should anything exist rather than nothing? Then he was silent, and his light went out, and where he had been there was only a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from a summer road. Jace stood. His hands were shaking. He was 24 years old, and he was frightened, and he did not try to pretend otherwise. He turned to Velthan. "I need to go to the edge," he said, "where the quiet is. That is suicide. Maybe, but I have an idea." He paused. "I can't do it alone, though. I need to be connected to as many minds as possible. Not to combine our intelligence. That would just be more of the same. But every species thinks differently. You see time, Syra sees memory, the Maluri see space. 100 species, 100 ways of understanding reality. If I can link to all of them, I can be a bridge. I can take all those different ways of thinking and weave them together into something new. You are asking the galaxy to pour its consciousness into the mind of one human." "I'm asking the galaxy to trust me," Jace said. "I know that's a lot." The call went out across every channel, every frequency, every network in the Union. It was not a command. It was a request. A human voice, translated into 10,000 languages, asking a simple thing. "Help me think." Syra was the first to answer. She was on threshold, in her quarters, and when the link activated, she felt Jace's mind touch hers like a hand reaching through a curtain. It was warm. It was strange. It was nothing like what she had expected. His mind was not a fortress, or a blade, or a vast machine. It was a web, a living, shifting web of connections, always reaching, always looking for the pattern in the chaos. She gave him her memory, all of it. Every moment of her life, every fact she had ever learned, every perfect crystal of Delvari knowledge. He took it gently, and she felt him weave it into something larger. Velthan linked next, his temporal awareness, the deep, bone-level sense of time that the Korvathi carried like a second heartbeat, flowed into the web. Then the Maluri, with their spatial genius. Then the Thren, with their emotional intelligence so vast that they could feel the mood of a room the way humans felt temperature. Then thousands more. Then millions, from every world, every station, every ship in the galaxy, minds reached out and joined the link. Not because they were ordered to, because they chose to, because the stars were going out, and a young man from a death world had asked for their help. And in that moment, the fear of what he was mattered less than the hope of what they might become together. Jace stood at the observation deck of Threshold Station, facing the void. The quiet was visible now, even from here, a patch of absolute nothing on the edge of the sky, growing larger by the minute. He could feel 1 billion minds behind him, flowing through him, and he could feel the quiet ahead of him, vast and patient and utterly terrifyingly empty. He reached out to it, not with a weapon, not with a shield, with a question. "What are you?" The quiet answered, not in words, in absence, in the terrible, perfect logic of non-existence. It showed him the argument that had consumed the Archons, the question that no intelligence in the history of the universe had ever been able to answer. Why should anything exist rather than nothing? Nothing was simpler. Nothing was more elegant. Nothing had no suffering, no loss, no entropy, no decay. Existence was messy and painful and complicated and ultimately pointless. The quiet was not a destroyer. It was a correction, a return to the default state. The logic was perfect. Every civilization that had tried to argue against it using reason alone had failed, because reason alone could not justify existence over non-existence. The equation balanced either way, and nothing would always be the simpler answer. Jace felt the weight of it, the cold, clean perfection of the void's argument. He felt 1 billion linked minds straining against it, and he felt them beginning to falter. The Delvari's perfect memory could not remember a reason. The Korvathi's temporal awareness could not find a moment that justified all others. The Maluri's spatial genius could not map a purpose. But Jace was human, and humans had never been very good at logic when it mattered most. He thought of Earth, not the planet as a whole, but the small things. A child laughing at a soap bubble, an old woman feeding pigeons in a park, two strangers sharing an umbrella in the rain, a song that made you cry even though you didn't understand the words. The way sunlight looked, coming through a window in the morning. The way it felt to be loved and know you didn't deserve it, and love someone back anyway. None of it was logical. None of it answered the question. But all of it was true. He gathered every scrap of that truth from every mind in the link. Not just human minds, but all of them. The Delvari mother who remembered every second of her daughter's first smile. The Korvathi elder who had spent 1,000 years watching the same sunset and never gotten bored. The Maluri child who had once built a tower of stones just to see how tall it could get. A billion small, beautiful, pointless moments from a billion different lives. And he pushed them into the quiet. Not as an argument, not as proof, as an answer. "You're right," he said to the void. "Existence doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to be here. There's no logical reason for any of it. But it is here. And we are here. And every single one of us, every mind in this link, every life that has ever been lived, we chose to keep going. Not because we could prove it was worth it, because we felt it. Because existing with all its pain and mess and confusion is something, and something, even pointless something, is worth more than nothing. Not because of logic, because of us, because we say so. Every moment we choose to stay, we are the answer." The quiet listened. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The void hung at the edge of the sky, vast and dark and absolute. A billion minds held their breath. Then the nothing changed. It didn't retreat. It didn't collapse or dissolve or go away. It transformed. The absence became potential. The silence became a canvas. Where there had been void, there was now space. True space. Raw and empty and waiting to be filled. And in that new space, one by one, stars began to ignite. Not the old stars returning, but new ones, born from the energy that the quiet had held in its stillness for eons. The void had not been a destroyer. It had been a seed, waiting for a reason to grow. Jace fell to his knees on the observation deck. The link dissolved gently, each mind withdrawing, like fingers releasing from a shared grasp, and he was alone in his own head again. It felt small and quiet and warm, like coming home to an empty house. Sira found him there. She sat beside him and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "You cried. During the link. I felt it." "Yeah," Jace said. "Sorry." "Don't be. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever felt." Months passed. The galaxy rebuilt itself, not into what it had been, but into something new. The Union reorganized. The nursery was dismantled. The Archons were gone, but their legacy remained in the structures they had built, now repurposed for a galaxy that no longer needed guardians. Humanity was not elevated above other species. They were not made rulers or leaders or weapons. Instead, they became what they had always been best at: bridges, translators between alien ways of thinking, the ones who could sit between two minds that had nothing in common and find the connection. The gauntlet was retired, its questions were archived, its amphitheater converted into a classroom. And one morning, Jace Morrow stood at the center of that classroom and looked up at 200 new cadets. They were young and frightened and brilliant, and they came from 100 different worlds, and they were looking at him the way he had once looked at his console, with the feeling that something impossible was about to happen. He thought about Velthon's speech, the one about limits and barriers and the things that could not be done. He thought about the quiet, and the stars, and the billion minds that had trusted him with their thoughts. There is no final question, he said. That's the point. The test doesn't end because understanding doesn't end. Every answer is just the beginning of a better question. He smiled. Let's begin. In the back of the amphitheater, in a seat that should have been empty, a shimmer of old starlight gathered into a shape that was almost a figure. Observer Kale, or what remained of him, looked down at the human with eyes that burned with something that was finally, unmistakably, joy. "Ninth class," he whispered. "Confirmed." And in the classroom below, 200 new minds opened their consoles, and the questions began.